Good morning, Inspector. Just to confirm that the session is live on YouTube.
Right, good morning again, and the inquiry is resumed. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Right, so what I thought we'd do next, as I said earlier, was to go through these sites. So look at the statement of common ground and these tables. Really, if Mr. Well, I think the best thing is, I mean, Mr. Taylor has basically outlined why he thinks there's not clear evidence of these sites being delivered. And this is the Stodmarsh ones affected by the Stodmarsh nutrients. So can you, as on behalf of the council, say whether you agree or not on what Mr. Taylor's actually put into that table? Ms. Goodyear.
Well, we don't agree. I think at the end of the table, there's the council's delivery position.
Yeah, yes,
So,
I mean, you've said, yeah, I mean, you've got the delivery there, right? And on all of these, you've said, the council said that they're deliverable. And the council, but when you say you've not agreed, this is what the council originally said in the, as deliverable in this statement, the monitoring report, isn't it, really?
yes.
But you've now heard, I mean, you're speaking on behalf of the council, I know, but you've now heard the evidence that since that monitoring report, you've heard the evidence now Mr. Taylor's given as to why he thinks, at least if they're not deliverable at all, that they're certainly going to be put back under scenario 2, so that they're not all those houses will be delivered. So, and the council is basically just saying, well, no, that evidence isn't valid, and they are going to be deliverable. So why would you say that?
Well, I don't agree that they won't be deliverable. I mean, as
Well,
stated,
this is the 5-year period, yes.
Yeah, in the 5. Sorry,
ever.
yeah, in the 5. No,
No,
I don't
think this is. Well, I don't think Mr. Taylor's saying that they won't ever be deliverable.
No. Sorry, I meant in the 5-year period.
Yeah. No, I knew what you meant, but I just want to clarify that. Yeah.
No, I think, as I said, I think there is. I mean, it kind of comes back to the Stodmarsh, but I think there is clear evidence. Obviously, the council is the ones working on the SPD and working on the site acquisitions and having discussions with landowners, etc. So they are best placed to understand how far these discussions have progressed, and they are confident, and I can see that work, they're moving forward towards that position, so that these sites can be brought forward and there'll be an SPD in place. And not all of the sites are relying on an SPD. Some of the sites have their own mitigation, can provide their own wetlands, etc. So I believe that, as their position stated, there is evidence to suggest they're deliverable.
Right.
Where's the evidence there? So I think it's just
where is this evidence?
It's about the delivery of Stodmarsh, and it's as set out in.
So it's evidence on delivery of Stodmarsh.
The mitigation for Stodmarsh. So I was just reading over the break in my appendix to my proof that we've been to already. It does confirm that they have had discussions with landowners, and including working towards preliminary designs of the wetlands needed. So that's
it's to do with the SPD, is it?
Yeah.
But also, are the wetlands going to be part of the actual solution for individuals as well?
Yes.
What is there? That's basically the solution for all of these, the ones that are going to be negotiated and the ones that are going to be covered by the SPD.
They'll
are
provide.
All going to rely on these wetlands.
Yes.
Right. So it all all depends on the wetlands delivery, really. And in terms of that, there's no certainty over that, is there?
Well, I think they're, are moving forward towards delivery. It's obviously a process that takes time because the council need to identify sites, and they've been working closely with Natural England and the Environment Agency to understand what they need, design these wetlands, and work on finding sites for these wetlands. So I think there is evidence there to say they are moving forward, and they've got a clear timeline that they're working to deliver this mitigation.
And so, are you involved in this?
I'm not involved in this, no.
No. So you're basically giving the council's statement of what they're doing.
Yeah. And from obviously discussions I've had with the officers as well. Yeah.
So you've discussed it with officers. And in terms of these particular sites, is there anything that says, I mean, because there's two scenarios. One is the two scenarios that the appellant's been put forward. One is that there'll be some delay. And in terms of the sites, when these have been put in, you're saying that the sites have allowed for this Stodmarsh problem.
I think I think there's a difference between Mr. Taylor and I. He says that house builders won't do anything until the mitigation is in place, but permissions can be granted, albeit once the SPD is adopted. So then once
you're saying permissions can be granted once the SPD has been adopted?
Yes. And then developers or site owners, etc., can work on delivering that scheme and doing the lead-in work that's required up to building the actual houses. And it's actually the occupation of the houses that will be restrained by the completion of the wetlands.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of what, sorry, carry on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, in terms of, I've worked on sites with nitrates before and kind of witnessed the developers moving forward and pushing forward. And I think there's evidence that this is what's happening in Ashford too. Planning applications are coming forward, or even though there is the Stodmarsh requirement at the moment with no SPD in place, developers are still spending significant sums of money developing an application and putting it forward for consideration. They're working on their Section 106 agreements to make sure that everything is in place so that once Stodmarsh mitigation once the SPD is adopted, these permissions can be issued and they can move forward quickly. So I think these sites will move forward as set out.
Yeah. In terms of move forward though, wouldn't there be a delay?
I think they've already accounted for the delay. There is inevitable. There's delay in effect at the moment. There's delay because they're not being approved when they could be approved, I suppose. But they've already allowed for that delay and accounted for that in the delivery.
Well, look, can we look at, say, first site? Site has, this is the comments on deliverability. Site has outline planning permission is in the process of being sold to a private developer, intention to develop out within 5 years. No infrastructure ownership or viability constraints, but constrained by Stodmarsh. Site therefore considered deliverable in years 4 and 5. So do you think that's realistic then?
There's actually a reserve matters application in for that site, and that's likely to go to planning committee on the 16th of March. So I currently see no reason why once we get the SPD, that won't come forward as predicted. I think in his proof, Mr. Taylor raises, there is a temporary planning permission on this site for a car park, but it's council owned land, and it's only part of it, the car park is a much wider area, so that's a use they can cease as soon as they're able to bring forward the development. It's not part of any strategic car park.
Yes, and this is towards the end of the period, and that's 200 dwellings according to that. So that is at the full
And it's
amount of the site then.
Yeah, it's yeah, they're blocks of
So
flats.
it's saying that the whole of the site will be able to be developed in the 5-year, by the end of the 5-year period then.
Yeah, it's also blocks of flats. So sorry, sir.
I would say blocks of flats. So it's the whole of all of these blocks of flats will be completed and able to provide a supply in that 5-year period then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what you're saying on that. Yeah, I mean, I mean, the next one's quite large as well. So this one, so we're looking at Waterbrook. What about that one then?
This one is, there's a live outline planning application. Granted, and the applicant is looking to develop on-site wetlands to provide their own solution. And I understand that those discussions are ongoing between the applicant and the case officer.
So yeah, so this is reserved matters again.
Yeah, so, and the applicant's keen to progress that one as far as they can. That's my understanding. I'm obviously not a case officer at Ashford, so this is being reported back to me.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So that's 2 of those, and then we're looking at, let's have a look at another one.
The next one's 20 dwellings. So
yes, I'll look at another one that's quite large, which is looking at sharing land adjacent to. So this is another reserve matters again.
Yeah, are you on S29?
Sorry. Well, I was thinking, well, there's 2 really. There's S55 was the 140, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that.
I think I would say on S55, I think there's, the council were looking at 140 in the 5-year period.
Yeah.
But I think it is right to say that the outline permission was for 135 units. So I think that might just be an error in that case. And the reserve matters information that's in at the moment has reduced the scheme to 131. But I think it was the scheme that's the application that's in at the moment only covers part of the site. So the indicative capacity for the whole site is 180 dwellings, but obviously the application is, well, now at reserve matters, it's for 131.
Yeah, so that's more likely if you're going to provide all of them, you'd have 131 then rather than 140.
Yeah.
And so in terms of site is impacted by Stodmarsh issue.
Stodmarsh again, but again, the council are hoping to take it to planning committee to sort of resolve all of the other issues in March and April this year.
But they're not providing their own mitigation.
They're not.
Like one Waterbrook. Yeah.
No, they would. Yeah.
They'd rely on the SPD. Yeah.
Yeah, the borough-wide strategy. So again, I presume they'll look for a resolution to grant.
Yes, but
subject to the SPD.
Yeah. So that one's. So they're the ones with some planning permission, aren't they? Those ones. Yeah. Basically, I've just picked out a few. And then the other ones with no planning permission, which you've got quite a large one here. commercial quarter, Tannery Lane, S1.
Yes, there's an outline application. And I understand there's discussions between the landowner and a developer to bring forward the development as soon as Stodmarsh is resolved. Oh, sorry, that's actually a full planning application, excuse me.
So this is it's
a live full planning application, but
full planning application. Mm-hmm.
And I understand from the case officer that the applicant is in discussions with a developer who's recently completed another Ashford Town Centre development, and they're looking to take this site on and build it out once the Stodmarsh mitigation is in place.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of these, do you think this would put developers off though, having the problem of Stodmarsh to negotiate?
From the evidence and speaking to these the case officers, I don't think it is, because all of them, people are submitting applications, people are submitting reserve matters details. As it said in relation to this site, they've had discussions with the applicant who said that they've got a developer who wants to build this site out, having built something else in the town centre. They're keen to get on board. So I don't think things haven't stopped because of it. Yeah. Everything's moving forward still. It's just permission can't be issued, but everything, they're clearly working to deliver these sites.
Right. So that one's, and then you've got another one. So most of these are
so I think S2.
So really you've got another one you've got hybrid then coming up, S2.
That planning permission was actually issued for that on the 11th of February 2021. Sorry, what am I talking about? It must be, it was this year. 22.
11th of February this year, planning permission.
Yes.
Has been granted.
Yeah, I've put the wrong date in, sorry. And they're providing their own mitigation, and they have a live planning application in at the moment for that mitigation, which the case officer has said should be determined by May 2022. So again, it just points to me to not only has a developer negotiated their application through, they've also spent time, money and effort putting in an application for their wetland to prove that it can be delivered, and they haven't turned around and said Stodmarsh means we can't deliver, we're going to find a solution and make it happen.
Yes. Yeah, and then again, S3, S4, they're all, no, S4, it doesn't, application.
S4 and S5, I understand to be the same site, under the same application.
It doesn't actually mention anything to do with Stodmarsh for S4 and 5, whereas
it is affected. And actually for S4 and S5, the applicant is proposing an on-site water treatment works. And I've had an update from the case officer on S4 and S5 to say that the applicant considers they can complete the dwellings at a rate of 150 to 200 dwellings per year. So they are larger sites. So it would be feasible for them to deliver, I think it's 130 and 100 dwellings in the period.
So these haven't got any constraints because they're building their own.
They're going to sort the mitigation out themselves, so they're not. And the case officer has said, I'm confident that this application will be resolved this year.
And I mean, I know there's, I mean, I might as well go back to S3 then. So we're looking at Court Lodge.
There again, that's on-site Stodmarsh mitigation, and the applicant's in final discussions with Natural England about that. When the council are hoping they'll be able to take the application to an early March planning committee.
So this is providing its own mitigation again?
Yes. And in their the case officer has told me that in their application, the applicant has said they intend to be on site within a year of securing their outline permission. And they predict they'll be able to build at 100 dwellings or more a year. So actually, what do we put? 130 certainly seems achievable, if not more, on that basis.
And then, and we're going through quite a lot now. I mean, I'm assuming you've got responses on all of these, have you?
I haven't got responses. I haven't got up-to-date responses on everything, because partly because the officers at the council are incredibly busy with a lot of applications. Yeah.
So yes, I mean S8. They're saying that not all of them will be delivered, but 110 by a year within the 5-year period.
Yeah.
And then and that is that one based on the SPD or the?
I think this one's based. Yeah, they're proposing a contribution to off-site mitigation.
Yeah. And S13, no planning permission. We're getting a bit further on. What I'll do is I mean, these ones without planning permission, then we're getting on to. I think I'll leave those for now. And then, so what I've got is quite a lot of sites there that we've gone through. And I'd like to just see what Mr. Taylor's got to say from the comments you've made on those, because I don't know whether it's going to be helpful to go through every single site, but it seems that there are quite a few of those. There's certain measures that are going to be put in place. But anyway, I'll ask Mr. Taylor about what he considers that he's heard so far. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. There was quite a bit of new information there that, quite frankly, isn't before the inquiry and isn't provided as clear evidence to support the 5-year housing land supply statement. So.
I mean, I think this is an update, but it should have been provided really in the evidence. Yes.
So, so my primary contention again is that there's not clear evidence around these sites to demonstrate that they're deliverable, and I still think that's the case. Going to a couple of the points, there's now kind of 3 subsets of sites in that package that we've just discussed. There's those sites that are reliant on the borough-wide mitigation strategy. That's particularly those kind of town centre sites. So we talked about VC14 Elwick Road, where there's blocks of flats. There was another one, which is Tannery Lane, which is again blocks of flats in Ashford town centre. Those sites have no prospect of delivering on-site mitigation to achieve nutrient neutrality. And that's both nitrates and phosphates. For those sites, they are beholden to the borough-wide mitigation strategy coming on stream, generating those credits and being able to progress. And that's why, again, my primary scenario is that there's not clear evidence for them, but my secondary scenario is that even if that does occur, it will inevitably cause a delay from the council's currently set out time scale, particularly for sites where there's kind of big blocks of flats, to assume that they're all going to be delivering within the 5-year period. So I think is just entirely unsupported. So there then comes a series of sites where they're mostly greenfield urban extension type sites, where the planning applications are in, and the developers are saying, well, we think we can do a wetland solution on site or as part of the scheme in some way. And so that's potentially feasible, but again, there's no information and no evidence on what that actually looks like, and the timescales associated with that, and what impact that therefore has on the delivery of those sites. And again, so my primary position is there's no clear evidence. My secondary position is that even if you accept that they could theoretically happen, they won't happen as quickly as the council are saying. Now, so there's one site which we briefly touched on that actually falls now into a third subcategory, and this is a position that's actually changed since we even agreed the statement of common ground, and that's the S2 site, as you just heard, land northeast of Willsborough Road, Kennington, sometimes also called the Conningbrook site. So that was granted planning permission. It was a hybrid application, so the first phase is in detail, and it was granted planning permission. I had it down as the 21st of January 2022, but Ms Goodyear said that it was in February. Either way, it's sometime around very recently. I'm not going to be intransigent, sir, and suggest that my scenario 1 still applies to that site. It's clearly now got its permission. There is further information that has since become available that demonstrates what the solution for that site could be. My position on that site, though, sir, remains that it will not occur as quickly as the council suggests it will, such as to deliver 190 units on a single site with a single named house builder within the 5-year period. And so it's probably worth just reflecting on this site, because it is almost the first one kind of up and out of the trenches in terms of.
Can I just move on to, well, you've mentioned this site, but isn't that now, if it's got planning permission, that's now is that now going into a category A situation where?
So it is, and that's why I've stated my clear position that I'm not going to be intransigent. My scenario 1 no longer applies, but with category A, you've still got to look at what the phasing for the site's delivery is and how long it will take to achieve homes from that site. And so again, my clear position is that that site will not realistically deliver the 190 units that the council suggests. And so just for reference, the statement of common ground gives a précis of my conclusion, but that's backed up within my Appendix 2 schedule of my proof of evidence that goes into some detail on all of these sites and the current position. Indeed, actually more detail than the council provided in the original 5-year land supply document. But sir, on that, and I think to highlight my point, if we can turn up.
So can I just, before you do that, with S2, it's providing its own mitigation, isn't it? That's what the council suggested.
Yes, sir. So it's providing its own mitigation, and a planning application has recently gone in to provide that mitigation. And so there were some core documents that were added yesterday, I believe, to the core documents list relating particularly to this site. So there was the CD 8.55 is the Conningbrook Committee report, and I don't propose to go to that that document, but it's there so that you can see the background to this site and what it's proposing. CD 8.54 is worth opening up, and that is the section 106 for that permission that was granted in January, February time. And so if you can go to schedule 22, I believe it is.
So schedule 22 of?
22 of the section 106 document, which is CD 8.54.
So which page is?
It's right at the bottom, or not right at the bottom, but it's just before. I think I had it.
So schedule
22 off-site wetland. It starts on page 129.
129, yes.
So
Offsite schedule 22.
This part of the section 106 for this site details what now needs to happen to allow for that site to come forward. So what needs to be delivered in terms of the off-site wetland, what the stages are. And so if you scroll down to 2.1 and thereon, it says at 2.1, prior to the commencement of developments, and that's prior to the commencement of the development on the housing site, the applicant has to prepare and submit a wetland development proposal to the council for approval. It has to submit necessary applications, submit applications for the necessary consents. So each of these wetlands are going to need consents from, I understand, Natural England and the Environment Agency, because they all involve diverting or extracting water from existing watercourses. And so that's not, in my achieving such statutory consents, in my experience, is not a quick process. They need to submit the application for the planning permission wetland developments in accordance with the wetland development proposal. Now, I understand that's the application that has already been made. They need to secure the necessary consents and planning permission for the wetland development, make any necessary amendments to the development proposals as may be required, and then to obtain the approval of the wetland development proposal by the council. So before they can even start, they need to get their planning permission for the wetland and all the associated technical consents. So it then goes on that there's an occupation clause in the once the wetland development is completed, and that means that once it's established and operational, it would then need a certificate of satisfactory completion. And so para 2.4,
This is a bit strange. I've got a freeze there.
through before homes can be completed.
Yes, you were frozen there.
Sorry,
For
sir.
some reason.
Can you hear me now? I think my
I
Wi-Fi.
can, but you were frozen for a short period of time. You were saying an occupation clause certificate of satisfaction. So
Yes, so,
can you just-
it requires, once the wetland development is completed, it would need a certificate of satisfactory completion. And at para 2.4, it says that the occupation of home can only occur once that is complete. So essentially what that means is that there's, of course, a timeline. You've got to deliver the wetlands, or get the permission, get the necessary statutory consent, build the wetlands, ensure that they're established and doing their job, which is achieving the removal of nutrients such that you can achieve the nutrient neutrality to release the homes for development occupation. Now, there's no real information on precisely the timescales that it will take to discharge these requirements. Again, the application for the wetland was registered literally days ago, 8th of February. The target date for determination is May, as Ms. Goodyear set out, but whether that will be met, given that's the statutory timescale, but as we know, with consultees on these things, that may take longer. And particularly this will need Natural England and EA agreement. There's then a need to gain the regulatory consents and indeed any pre-commencement conditions that may be attached to any permission. Now, the council, or rather a document was submitted yesterday, sir, that was an ES summary for the wetlands construction. Now, in that document, and sir, the reference is CD 8.47. It talks to a construction period of 16 to 20 weeks. Now, sir, it's important to note that that is a construction period for the purposes of assessing significant effects as part of the ES. That's essentially the period that it takes to build the structures that would be needed, do all the earthworks and the like, because it's those kind of impacts that's looking to. What the ES doesn't say is when that 16 to 20 weeks period could actually occur. And it also doesn't intimate that that is the fullness of the position. And indeed, I don't think it is the fullness of the permission, because even once constructed, you've then got to wait for the wetlands themselves to establish such that they become fully operational. Now, sir, on that point, on operational, the CD 8.47 proposed wetland area, so CD 8.48 S2 constructive wetland design and specification. So, and I think it's just helpful to bring that document up. So that's CD 8.48.
Yeah.
And if we go to page 13, section 4.5, sadly the paragraph numbers aren't set out, but just at 4.45 in the second paragraph, it's key to note that it's stating halfway down, it says if the wetland startup is rushed, i.e. the hydraulic load is increased to normal operating levels before the wetland is stabilised, then the wetland can become a net exporter of nutrients. The key thing I think to take from this is that we're dealing with plants that need to be planted and then need to establish, and that takes time and it takes growing seasons. Now, if we turn over the page sorry, that was page 13 to page 14, at the top and on the second paragraph at the top of page 14, it states vegetation on this scale will need to be provided on a grow to order basis, whereby the plant supplier is contracted to grow, deliver and plant the vegetation. Whilst this is more expensive than leaving the wetland to vegetate naturally, the key difference is the time taken for the vegetation to become established enough for the wetland to become operational. A planted wetland can become operational after 1 to 2 growing seasons, whereas a natural vegetation can take 3 to 5 growing seasons. Now, so I am a keen gardener, but that extends just to my greenhouse and not to wetland operations. But the key point here is you've got to get a growing season, at least 1, potentially 2, before the wetlands can become operational, and you can achieve that sign-off that you need to release the homes. Now, sir, that in and of itself on the S2, and this is all related to the S2 Conningbrook sites, the northeast of Willsborough Road. But that essentially means that it could take several years before houses can be completed on this site. And sir, I think that belies the what the assumption that 190 dwellings in the 5-year period will be achieved, because even with the complication of the wetlands, there still needs to be appropriate lead-in times between developers getting out on site and delivering their homes, and then there still needs to be appropriate build-out rates applied thereafter, with typically the rule of thumb used is about 50 homes per annum per house builder per site. And so I think where that evidence leads us to on the Conningbrook is that it doesn't support the council's contention that 190 homes will be delivered within the 5-year period. And the conclusion from that actually applies across all of these sites, because even if you accept that they can deliver the wetland mitigation, the timescales and lead-ins for delivering this wetland mitigation, it's not a short-run thing, sir. It will take time to go through all the regulatory steps to establish these wetlands, to make sure that they're operating in the manner that they're required to operate before the homes can be built. And so that's what my scenario 2 is ultimately trying to capture.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this though, you're saying that you need clear evidence to show that these are deliverable. But I mean, from what I can see, the main evidence you're saying that hasn't been provided is regarding the Stodmarsh mitigation, isn't it, really, and most of these, and that isn't necessarily clear evidence to show that they're not deliverable. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the test, but all I'm saying is that the council appears to me on a lot of these to show that there is evidence that there's planning applications. A lot of these are reserved matters anyway. And in terms of deliverability, they are almost being delivered, but they're going to be delayed because of Stodmarsh. Isn't that more appropriate, rather than Stodmarsh is actually affecting the deliverability of it in terms of overall deliverability?
So again, yes, that is the position, but you've got to link that back to the clear test that's in the MPPF around demonstrating deliverability. It's not enough for the council to blindly assert that a site is deliverable and point to planning applications. The clear evidence test, it's got to be substantive. It's got to be of a, it's got to exist, and it's got to be provided as part of the 5-year land supply bundle of information. And it can't, for example, just be based on discussions, assertion, or estimates, timescales that aren't supported by any further evidence. And so that's the bar, as I say, hasn't been passed in terms of any of the stop marsh mitigation.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the stop marsh mitigation, what you're saying though is that because of that, these won't be able to deliver. But there might be, I mean, the fact is that the evidence at the moment is that there will be some mitigation eventually, because it's otherwise there's a real problem, isn't there? If there isn't an SPD in place and these aren't delivered, then there's the council or even if there aren't these wetland solutions, there's a real problem, isn't there? So you've got to actually say that some of these must be deliverable, because otherwise there's a real problem, isn't there?
So well, insofar as whether there will be a solution that comes forward, yes, I've no doubt there will be. So insofar as how you apply that to the 5-year land supply position, it's got to be through the prism of the definition of deliverability within the MPPF. And that requires clear evidence. And if there's not the clear evidence to conclude that these sites are deliverable, because, for example, we don't know what the wetland solutions will be at a borough-wide position. We don't know where those wetlands are, whether they themselves are deliverable, because we don't know what the wetlands they themselves are. You can't come to a conclusion that for the purposes of the 5-year land supply test and the definition of deliverable in the MPPF, that those sites can currently count. Now, it might be, sir, that in a year's time, the SPD is adopted, the sites are all there, planning applications are going in, and there becomes clear evidence at that point that these sites will then be deliverable. But the definition in the MPPF is quite clear that there needs to be clear evidence.
Right, and you're saying that there isn't clear evidence on stop marsh mitigation to show that any of these are deliverable.
That's correct. That's my scenario one.
Yeah. Okay then, thank you. So can I move back to Ms. Goodyear then?
Yes, I don't know whether you want me to dwell on my thoughts on S2. That's originally why I put my hand up. I don't know.
The reply on S2 is that's what you put your hand up for, is it?
Originally.
Yeah.
Excuse me. We didn't go to the definition of certificate of satisfactory completion that Mr. Taylor Rose noted, and that's on page 130 of 8.5.4, CD 8.5.8 to 54, sorry. And that says a certificate issued by the council that the wetland development has been satisfied.
Sorry. I'm just trying to get the right document. Well, I've got a CD 8.5.
Sorry, 8.54. I'm putting too many points in.
8.54. I've lost it completely now. I don't know where it's gone. I'll have to find that again.
Should I just read?
So it's page. I can get the document.
Page 130. It's the very top of page 130.
page 130. Yeah, I've got, right. I've got it now. Yeah. I'll just get to 130. Yeah, definition. Yeah.
Definition. So that essentially it says the council has to be satisfied that the wetland is provided and laid out. That's that definition. And
so that means it doesn't need any approvals of the EA or
no, I think it would still need approvals of the EA. I mean, I'm not an expert on water abstraction, I'm afraid. So, but I understand it would still need Environment Agency approval. But in terms of when the wetland is achieving this certificate, I just wanted to point out what that definition the council is going to be testing it on.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I suppose we're in slight disagreement with Mr. Taylor, and particularly on these sites where developers are providing their own mitigation that they control and they know when they can deliver it and within their timescales. I do think that wouldn't prevent development because Mr. Taylor's referenced not built, but actually the trigger is occupation. So the developer can get to the point where he's ready, that houses are ready to be occupied, and then at the time this certificate is completed. So I think there's things that can happen together, and the growing season can be happening whilst they're laying out roads, whilst they're building foundations and building these houses, and it's only the occupation that's the key trigger.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Anything else you'd like to say?
I was just going to
what's been said by Mr. Taylor so far.
I was just going to go back to CD 2.9b, which is the housing land supply statement, and in there I believe there's a reference to the PPG at paragraph 2.5.
Yes.
And that's talking about that sort of providing a better definition of clear evidence, and this judgment really that needs to be made about the clear evidence. And I suppose my point here is that, I mean, the council, when they produce their housing and supply statement, are the people who are involved in producing the SPD and involved in the discussions with developers about these sites and their mitigation measures, etc. So have a good idea of what the evidence is. Excuse me. And how quickly these things can be delivered.
Yeah. So this is basically quoting from the.
It's basically yeah. So I just thought that would be a helpful reference for you.
So you're saying that these meet all these criteria then?
I think they're examples effectively. So I'm saying that I think there is clear evidence there.
Yes,
in
I mean,
terms
with
of the delivery of
timescale
this.
for approval of reserve matters applications or firm progress being made. Well, some of these had applications already.
Yeah, I think as we've sort of discussed, we've discussed a variety of different things that.
So these are all, I mean, could include the following. So it doesn't say it has to include all of them. Yeah, so, yeah. Right, I mean, So you're saying that you consider there is clear evidence on these? No?
Yeah.
Within that definition? I mean, in terms of some of these, though, I mean, I know we've looked at some of the more, what about the ones without planning permission, which are S13, S19, S20? There's quite a lot of those. S24, well, S24 we'll cover next after this, but on these, but those ones with no planning permission, what about those?
It's probably easier to run through them individually.
Yeah, I think so.
As far as you can. S13 is a former school. It was used as a temporary school, and now the Chilmington Primary School is open, so it is no longer being used for its current use, and the site's owned by Kent County Council. And so there's no impediment to it coming forward, and nothing to stop it being brought forward within the period. And there's been an adjacent site excuse me, that provides vehicle access into S13 that is now complete. So there's access available too.
Yeah, but this is another one affected by the.
It's also affected by Stodmarsh, but there's there'd be nothing to stop a planning application coming forward in the time that the SPD is coming forward, and then the mitigations being delivered to ensure that it can be delivered. So there's nothing to affect that.
But wouldn't it be additional costs, etc., that might not have been allowed for when it was?
There will be additional cost, but that's for across the board, I suppose. And
yeah,
the evidence
some of them have progressed a bit further than others.
Yeah,
these haven't really progressed.
I suppose I take the evidence from the sites that have progressed that those developers aren't put off by that additional cost in terms of delivery. And in fact, they've, particularly S2, as we've just been talking about, they're delivering their own on-site mitigations. They must have a good idea of the cost of having worked up a full planning application for that mitigation. Mm-hmm. So I don't see, and as I said earlier, there's regard to one of the sites in Ashford where there's a developer interested in building that site, having just built out another site. There's clearly a lot of interest, and they clearly want to be building these homes. So I think there's evidence, there's general evidence that it's not going to be prohibitive costs.
Right. And then this next one, S19, I'm assuming that's another phase of the Conningbrook that we was S2.
Yeah, phase 2. Right? And yeah, there's now a planning application submitted for that one as well. I don't have the date of registration, but the reference number is 2022, so it would have only recently been submitted.
Mm-hmm. And is that full or outline or?
I don't have outline application. That's been through, obviously the council can't provide details of the pre-application engagement before the application submitted, but they can now say that has been through pre-app engagement in November, and the members were briefed on the scheme in December, and they had earlier meetings in August. They've obviously been working with the applicants on that scheme for some time. since July 2020, actually, they've said here. So they've been working on that scheme for some time, and it's now a live application.
Right. So the next one is S20.
That's a live outline application. Excuse me.
So that's so are you okay? Or,
I've just had a cough for 3 weeks. I didn't want to cough down the headphone to you.
Or something, or
I'm fine. It's just I just have to get on with it. I'm sorry. Sorry, that's a live application that was submitted in December 2021. Outline application again for 375 dwellings and some commercial development. I think to respond to Mr. Taylor in his proof, I think he raised that the policy for the site requires a master plan to be agreed, but the council development control officers, he suggested that needed to be agreed first before the application could become forward, but clearly the application is now validated and the officers can take that master plan to committee at the same time as they make a resolution to grant this application. So it's not an impediment it won't delay the application or the consideration of the application.
And then it says Stod Marsh mitigation proposed on site.
Yeah.
And then we're on Tenterden, which I handle slightly differently. I'll look at that next after we've done these. And then we're looking at a few smaller sites, but there's quite a lot more sites, aren't there? There's I mean, we're looking at, I'll move on to major applications, which is, what I'll do is I'll move on to those later. There's major application granted permission subject to section 106 so I'll move on to those later, but I'll go on to Mr. Taylor again after with all of those.
So thank you. I'll try to be brief to try and get through these points. We started this segment of the conversation at the PPG and 2.5 para 2.5 of the CD 2.9b. And yes, absolutely, I think that's helpful as a list of examples of what clear evidence could include. So I just draw your attention to where it says written agreement between the local planning authority and the site developer, which confirms developers' delivery intentions and an anticipated start and build out rates. So I think the key thing there is that it's written agreement and that it needs to be in evidence. Again, my contention is that discussions, hearsay, and the like, informing assertion that then goes into a 5-year land supply position can't be considered to be clear evidence. So my clear proposition is that that part of the PPG just simply actually isn't met by what the council have provided in CD 2.9b. So just briefly touching on the sites that we went through, and I'll start with S13, the Ashford School. So my proof and evidence fully acknowledged that the site was vacated on the 1st of November. It's a vacant brownfield site, but as Ms. Goodyear said, it's owned by the council, the county council, I'm assuming, and there's no further information on what their aspirations are for that site, how it's going to be brought forward, whether it's going to be sold, whether it's going to be taken to market, whether the council themselves are going to deliver it. There's just no evidence whatsoever. Furthermore, it's a brownfield site, so it's going to more acutely feel the cost implications of any nutrient neutrality that's required. And it is a stop marsh site, and it will be requiring the borough-wide mitigation strategy to come forward. So that's why I've set out my scenario 1 and scenario 2 on that site. For Conning S19 Conningbrook residential phase 2, again acknowledge that an application has recently gone in, but again there's no information or clear evidence as to precisely how the mitigation and the wetland mitigation can be achieved and whether it's acceptable. There's again no further evidence put before the inquiry as to the deliverability of that site, and also how it works with the existing kind of development that's going on in that area and the phasing. S20 Eureka Park, again, acknowledge that an application has recently gone in. Again, similar point to S19. There's no clear evidence as to what the stop marsh mitigation on site is and whether it's actually acceptable. And again, no clear evidence on what the progress and timescales for that going forward is. And again, informing my scenario 1 and then scenario 2 based on an appropriate lead-in time.
Right, thank you. Right, so there's a few more now. I mean, I'm going through quite a lot of these in detail, but I think it's quite important in terms of how much. So really, we're looking at these others that have been highlighted, and I'll just move on to one that seemed to be quite big. Can't even find it now. Major applications granted permission subject. So there's the former B&Q Home Plus. So that's and that's 216 dwellings. So in terms of that one, can Ms. Goodyear highlight that?
There's a full application with a resolution to grant, so it's just waiting at section 106, and the issue again there is Stodmarsh. And in the housing land supply table, I think there's a note from the property developer as ABC Property Company, who expects delivery on the site as soon as Stodmarsh is resolved.
Right. Okay. I think we could spend a long time doing all this, but and then you've got the future expected windfalls. Wouldn't they be affected by this? That's good, yeah.
I think
it looks as though Mr. Taylor's knocked them down by about 100. But,
I think, sorry, as I said earlier, the windfalls are happening in year 4 and 5, and given we think the Stodmarsh mitigation, we think there's clear evidence Stodmarsh mitigation will come forward, I don't see how, I think Mr. Taylor references to Stodmarsh affecting windfalls, and I don't see that that will affect those windfalls, because their delivery is year 4 and 5 when occupations can occur. Again, I think the council has set out very clear evidence as to why they think that they can deliver that number of windfalls. They've included 3 tables in their housing land supply position statement, which are A9, A10 and A11, which show consistent rates of windfall delivery over 150 dwellings in the last 7 years. And they've also provided details of current applications that are in the windfall supply that could become, if they're approved, windfalls in years 4 and 5 in tables A6, A and A7. So they that amounts to, I think, 587 dwellings in the planning system without planning permission, and 741 dwellings without line permission or subject to approval of Section 106 or Stodmarsh mitigation. So there's quite a lot in the mix. I mean, they're windfalls, so they won't have permission at this stage. But I think there's quite a lot of information to say there's a lot of windfalls out there to suggest that they will be able to meet that level of windfall development, if not more.
Right, thank you. I'll hand over to Mr. Taylor on these points then, Mr. Taylor.
So I'm happy to take windfalls, but essentially the position is as set out in my proof, 4.21 through to 4.26. So, sir, I won't regale you with it all, but MPPF paragraph 71 is the starting point, and it says where an allowance is to be made for windfall sites as part of anticipated supply, there should be.
Sorry, can you just paragraph
71 of the MPPF.
Oh, so yeah, sorry, you're going back, yeah, going on to paragraph 71. Yeah.
So, and it says where an allowance is to be made for windfall sites as part of the anticipated supply, there should be compelling evidence that they will provide a reliable source of supply. So compelling evidence is the test here, sir. So we've had clear evidence. We're now on to compelling evidence. The overarching point that I make is that it's quite clear that because there has been a break in the ability to permit windfall developments in a large part of the district, there will inevitably be a break in the back end at the delivery of those windfalls, and therefore that's going to affect how many windfalls can reliably come forward in the future. So the point around the windfalls illustrations that the council set out in CD 2.9 2.9b. I'm not disputing that those are sites and that they may or may not come forward, but just for your reference, sir, in CD 2.9a at page 35, the Appledore Road appeal site, i.e. this site, appeared as one such windfall illustration in the council's windfall illustration last year. So the simple point there is to state that those inclusion in that table self-evidently can't be any firm indication that planning permission will be coming forward for those windfalls. So simple point is I don't think that actually supports the council's contention that there will be lots of windfalls coming through. So you're absolutely right. I deduct 100 units from the windfall allowance that the council make, and that's 33%, so a third of their 300. And the basis of that is that At best, I consider that only 16 months of windfalls are likely to come forward. If once the Stog Marsh issue, if it is resolved, so that will obviously reduce the amount of time that windfalls can be achieved within the 5-year period. Just some other contextual factors. The council indicates 35% of the overall 5-year supply is within the Stog Marsh affected area. And my analysis, based on the council's most recent position, is that 51% of the granted small site windfalls, that's as detailed in Table A8, and 95% of the council's major windfalls, and that's Table A6A, are within the Stog Marsh area. And so the key thing to take from this is there's no compelling evidence that windfall sites from non-Stog Marsh affected areas are coming forward to replace that gap that will inevitably be opening up because of the inability to grant windfall developments at the moment. And this is particularly an issue because the likelihood is that any borough mitigation strategy will place costs on many of these small scale schemes that may disproportionately affect their deliverability. So we may well see Stog Marsh having a significant and ongoing effect on the ability to bring forward small windfalls if it affects things like viability. And that's why I make the discount that I do.
Right, thank you. So that's good, yeah.
So I was just gonna, I don't think the council asserts in any form that the tables they provide to show what the potential planning applications in the system, that all of those will get planning permission. I think it's just to try and provide that compelling evidence to show that there is permission, there is applications out there that are windfall.
Okay, thank you. Right, what I'd like to next move on to, I mean, is there anything else out on this? I mean, we've explored Stog Marsh in quite a lot of detail, but can I just move on to Tenterden, as that seems to be a major one that's not affected by the Stog Marsh. So that's the, let's move back to that one. Tenterden southern extension. So Mr. Taylor, why are you taking this out altogether?
So simply because there's no clear evidence that it is progressing towards delivery. So the original position that the council set out in CD 2.9b simply confirmed that no application had been submitted. Indeed, the position on that site had simply been rolled forward from the last year's monitoring a 5-year land supply statement. And that there wasn't any indication at that point as to what the plans were for bringing that forward site. So, sir, it was simply a point of there was no clear evidence that it was going to be brought forward. So that there was an issue, and there still is an issue. I understand that there is as I understand it, and this is an instruction, I've not seen this particularly, but the correspondence from the landowner appears to confirm it, that there's a covenant on the land that would see significant overage payments due if the land's delivered pre-2028. So that raised my suspicions immediately about the deliverability of this site and how likely it is to come forward. And that's why why I've challenged whether there's actually clear evidence that the site will come forward. Now, sir, and I am in no doubt that Miss Goodyear will take you to her rebuttal. But there is correspondence, or to her proof and rebuttal, but there is correspondence from the legal firm that are representing the landowners, and my simple response to that is that that agent's correspondence does not comprise clear evidence. There's no actual substance to those letters that confirms firm progress. There's no timescales identified. There's no actual information on when an application will be submitted. The letter refers to initial feasibility work, but that doesn't sound particularly firm. Again, it's simply not clear that this site is coming forward. And just going back again, sir, to the PPG and the reference that we went to earlier, it says firm progress being made towards the submission of an application. For example, a written agreement between the local planning authority and the site developer, which confirms the developer's delivery intentions and anticipated start and build out rates. Well, we've got a written, what purports to be a written agreement, but it doesn't actually confirm what the developer's delivery intentions are in any kind of specific way, and it certainly doesn't set out any anticipated start dates or build out rates therein. So, sir, even with the letters that have been put forward from the landowner's agent, I still do not consider that comprises clear evidence that this site is actually coming forward.
Right, thank you. Ms. Goodyear.
Yeah, I disagree. I think there is clear evidence. I mean, these letters are from the landowner's agent. We're still in year 1 of the 5-year period, and they confirm that they're working on engaging in meaningful pre-application discussions. They've also confirmed that the covenant, which neither I or Mr. Taylor have seen, is not an issue, but clearly is the landowner. You'd hope that they...
Can you just go to those letters?
Yeah.
So they're in your appendix?
They're in my appendices. We've got one letter is an appendix to my rebuttal, which is R5, and that references the covenant.
Right, let's try and get these. These towards the end of your, because there's no numbers, are there? But,
no, sorry.
So, letter R5, yes, I've got
R5. So there's letter R5, which is reference to the covenant. And in my original proof, there is a letter with reference to their progress, which is Appendix 3.
So proof Appendix 3. Let's try and find where that is. That one's, yes, so that's Appendix 3, so this is, sorry, this letter again, the 11th of January 2022, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is to do with the initial feasibility study, yeah.
And master planning work.
Right. And you're saying that this is that's the main evidence you've got then on deliverability.
This
Yeah.
main evidence, yeah.
Right. Thank you. Right. Anything, Mr. Taylor?
So just to pick up a couple of points, these letters, of course, post-date the position that was set out in CD 2.9b. So they're somewhat trying to post-rationalise after the fact. But even then, looking at the two letters, they don't actually provide anything in the way of clear evidence as to what the intentions are of the landowner for when they're going to submit a planning application, when they're planning to deliver the site. And in the context of the admission that there's by the landowner's agents that there is an overage clause, that it exists, that's why it's quite clear that there may be reasons as to why they wouldn't seek to expedite the delivery of this site. So this site's obviously got quite a long history to it, and the same agents did appear at the local plan examination, which I also appeared at, saying similar things about this exact site 4 or 5 years ago, that it was going to deliver very quickly, and that clearly hasn't happened. So I ask you to take the letters at face value and on the information that they do contain, and that information doesn't actually provide any indication of when and what is coming forward at the site.
Thank you. Anything else on that one? No. Any other matters that anyone wants to raise regarding housing land supply that hasn't been discussed? I know that everything's in writing anyway. Right. So in that case, what I think I mean, it's 10 to 1 now, so there's no point in having any other witness now called, but thank you very much for the discussion. And so the next thing on the agenda, the next item on the agenda is it's really to do with the question and answer on heritage is Ms. Stoughton. But I'll do that after lunch, and that would also mean that we'll do it. We'll have Mr. Marshall called as well after lunch. But I don't know. I mean, all I've got on Ms. Stoughton is some questions that Mr. Poole would like to ask. So I'm not aware of anyone else wanting to ask any questions of Ms. Stoughton. But what it would be helpful to do with Ms. Stoughton is to for Mr. White to just go through roughly, very briefly, what she's got to say about everything, and then have the questions. You don't want to do that, Mr.
No,
White?
I certainly don't want to do that, but Miss Foster will do that, sir.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't worry. You went to know. You went to know. Miss Foster's going to call Miss Stoughton, and I have no doubt she's listening.
Right. So if we can do it that way, then, and likewise, I don't know who's going to call.
I'm going to call I'm going to have the pleasure of Mr. Marshall's company, and I will call him.
Yeah. So we'll do it that way then. But I mean, I've seen the questions of Mr. Poole, and I don't know whether is Mr. Poole available for this afternoon. Yes, Mr. Poole.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I've seen your questions. I mean, they go into a lot of detail, but if you can try and I'm sure Ms. Stoughton's seen what you've written, so it's really just asking them much briefer than that. So Ms. Stoughton is here as well. But if you can, are you available this afternoon to ask the questions?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't need to go into all the detail you put in the written. So it's just basically asking questions and any follow-up questions. But I just want to remind you, it's not a chance to make statements. It's just questions so that Ms. Stoughton has a chance to say what she thinks about it, and then you can ask follow-up questions on that. So that's the way it goes.
Will I it's the best way for me to ask the questions individually and then get a respond on each question. What I did, I put forward, because I had to submit them in advance, they are sort of sequential, some of them. So therefore, the next question relies on the answer to the first one, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, yes, I can. No, I can. I'm happy. No, if you ask them individually in sequence, if you want, and then hopefully we'll get the answers that to be able to address what some of those matters. But that will be fine, and then the follow up. So that's fine. So we'll do it that way. But like I say, first of all, Ms. Stoughton will be introduced by Ms. Foster, I think it is, yeah, and so then you'll have your questions, and as far as I'm aware, you're the only person who's put forward questions, so on this particular topic. So that will be the format. But anyway, I make it 5. Thank you. Is there anything else anyone wants to ask before I adjourn? So what I'll do is I'll adjourn until 1:55. So